Welcome everybody to this presentation. My name is John Pocknell. I'm the Product Manager for TOEFL Oracle Solutions. And I'm joined by my colleague, Scott Stone, who's the Senior Product Manager for Spotlight on Oracle RAC. So the DBA Suite Oracle is an edition of TOEFL that's been around for some time now. But what's particularly exciting with this edition is the ability to provide database administration capabilities for DBAs managing RAC environments. So we're going to get into a little bit about what RAC is and what typical challenges that we, talking to DBAs, discover that they have when they try to manage a RAC environment, which is a very complex environment. I'm going to pass the presentation over a few slides over to Scott, who's going to walk you through Spotlight on Oracle RAC, and then he'll pass it back to me, and I'll talk about some other pieces that are available with this suite that also support RAC. So we're going to go and have a look at what is Oracle RAC, what sort of problems solved by people using Oracle RAC. Why would somebody want to switch over from an instance configuration to a RAC cluster? What sort of challenges DBAs face with managing the complexities of Oracle RAC? And then talk about what our solution provides. So we'll get into what is actually included in this new edition. As I say, the DBA suite for Oracle has been around for a while, and essentially what we're doing is extending the capabilities into the RAC environment. So first of all, what is Oracle RAC? Now, I guess most of you probably attending this call know what RAC is, but if you're not, and you're fairly new, and you're considering moving across and using RAC, it stands for Real Application Clusters. It's a technology that Oracle introduced in 9i, and it's basically takes the Oracle grid concept to a point where instead of having a single database, single instance, what you have is a database which is actually shared across multiple servers and multiple instances. And there are several advantages of this configuration. One of the main ones is it lowers the total cost of ownership for high-end applications and all the associated assets, because instead of having to have your database application running on a really high-end expensive server, you can actually distribute the resources across a lot of low-cost modular servers and bring that cost of ownership down, bring the cost of administering those systems down. So the top graphic represents a typical Oracle single instance configuration that I guess all of you are familiar with. So we have an Oracle server which is hosting an instance and also hosting disk storage, and that whole configuration is typically referred to as a single instance configuration. The problem with this configuration is, of course, you have a single point of failure, because if the server goes down, then the database goes down. And this is one of the reasons people consider moving to RAC. The lower graphic represents a typical RAC configuration, what we refer to as a two-node cluster. So we have a similar setup, but in this case we have, two servers, each of which is hosting an instance. But the instance is shared by way of a high-speed interconnect. So the resources are shared across this interconnect. And the storage is actually shared storage, rather than storage being hosted on each individual server. And this whole configuration now is a RAC database. And this RAC database can have any number of different nodes. So what problems are solved by people using an Oracle RAC configuration? Well, the first one is reasonably obvious, actually, and that is scalability. If you want to increase the scalability of the application, you simply add more nodes to the cluster. Now, I'm oversimplifying it. It's not as easy as that, of course, because you've got to make sure that everything is balanced and is configured properly. But nonetheless, it's a great way of scaling an application. The other one, as already mentioned, is it gives you a much better application availability, because instead of having a single point of failure, you've got the ability such that should one of those nodes go down, then you just fail over to the remaining nodes. So you spread the resources across the remaining parts of the cluster. Third one, which is a bit of a tricky one, is application performance. If you've got it configured correctly, you can actually improve performance. And this is really where we're coming from, because this piece is not easy. If you can't dabble with RAC If you just start tweaking stuff and you don't really understand what you're doing, it can actually make things worse. So here's some of the challenges of managing Oracle RAC. First of all, as I said, it's a complex configuration, and you really need people who know what they're doing. And actually, Oracle RAC expertise, the high standard, is very limited. The other thing is tools, management tools. There are actually no graphical interfaces on the market that give you a consolidated top-level downwards view of your RAC performance. There's no way of diagnosing performance issues. Getting a RAC configuration wrong, as I mentioned, can actually lead to worse performance and lack of scalability. Generally speaking, RAC administrators are really in the dark when it comes to cluster metrics and identifying bottlenecks, because they see the pieces but they can't see the whole thing, so they don't get a sense of what is really happening in the RAC environment. And performance is a key concern with any database, particularly with RAC, and therefore there's a risk of performance degradation. And what we're finding in Quest when we speak to DBAs that are using RAC, we find that typically they play safe and have 2-node clusters, because they haven't got the ability to do any kind of risk assessment on, well, what if I tried a 4-node cluster or a 6-node cluster? They don't really know whether they would get a performance gain or not. So existing tools primarily only provide information about the individual pieces, with very little information on the whole RAC infrastructure. So the solution then is the TOAD DBA Suite Oracle RAC Edition. And as I mentioned before, this extends the capabilities of the DBA Suite Oracle primarily with Spotlight and Oracle RAC. And Spotlight and Oracle RAC gives you an excellent graphical view of performance of the entire RAC environment, which gives you a much better understanding of that environment. And by way of other pieces in the suite as well, you can actually assess whether or not you would make gains or losses by changing your configuration. So the benefits of the business is reducing the total cost of ownership of your RAC implementation by giving you unprecedented insight into that environment. The ability to find and fix Oracle and RAC issues before they impact your production performance. Helps reduce overall development and administration costs by automating several common database administration tasks. And finally, ensuring that your new applications will meet your business requirements and perform well in production without standing the risk of failure. So you're in the advantageous position of being able to predict what the impact of changes to your RAC environment are before you deploy them into a production environment. So what's actually included in this new edition? As I say, very similar to the DBA Suite for Oracle, we have TOAD Oracle Expert Edition, and this includes SQL Optimizer, which is our optimization technology for Oracle. The Database Administration module, which simplifies your database administration tasks and allows you to automate and schedule. TOAD for Data Analyst, which is a cross-platform querying and reporting tool. We have free use of that, so if you want to look at data from SQL Server or DB2. TOAD Data Modeler, which is a cross-platform logical and physical data modeling tool, which allows you to verify schema design, etc. for production. Benchmark Factory for Databases, Oracle Edition, which also supports RAC. And then finally Spotlight and Oracle RAC, which, by the way, also includes these other pieces. This is relatively new. On the 3rd of December, we did an upgrade to TOAD 10 to 10.1. And we upgraded Spotlight on Oracle to include these other pieces as part of that. So this is seat-based licensing, of course, and Spotlight on Unix, Linux, Spotlight on Windows, and predictive diagnostics. So these other Spotlights allow you to correlate what's happening on your database or your RAC configuration with what's actually happening on the server itself with the operating system. And predictive diagnostics takes you from having to react to issues when they actually cause a bottleneck to actually doing some predictive modeling, see, well, based on my current behavior, if I get SQL execution degradation, what impact is that going to have in the future, and do some predictions on that. So this is all now included in Spotlight on Oracle RAC. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is pass over to Scott Stone, and he's going to walk you through the Spotlight on Oracle RAC piece. So Scott, over to you.
Thank you, John. Spotlight on Oracle RAC, some of you may already be familiar with it. It combines the information from all the instances on through a single pane. We'll go through this in the presentation and also do a little demo later. It gives you a view of the cluster as a whole, so you can see both at a glance both the cluster performance as well as the individual node performance on one view. Shows the global health and activity of the cluster, the instant level activity at the same time, and it highlights the RAC-specific problems that you want to watch, like interconnect latency, unbalanced cluster, and excessive cluster overhead. These are the places where it is possible for you to actually get worse performance on a RAC than it is on an individual instance if you're not careful. We can't assume that performance is going to be better on RAC at all times unless it is properly configured. This is the famous homepage of the Spotlight on Oracle RAC. It follows the Spotlight paradigm of being a representation of the underlying architecture so that it's more intuitive to you as the DBA to understand what's going on, so it's not just a collection of grids and graphs. The first panel up here at the top shows the interconnect and global status panel, shows the global statistics and the status of the network interconnect that ties everything together. We also give you an indicator with a spinner of the interconnect load and the traffic moving in and out of each individual instance, and these are flows that actually increase and decrease in speed depending on the actual activity on that instance in order to give you a more intuitive understanding of what's happening in your environment. The average time taken to transfer a block across the interconnect, again, we're looking at cluster latency. The percentage of time that you're using on doing cluster work instead of doing database work, and this is obviously something you want to keep very low. There we go. Percentage of time the database did not find a block locally, that's the miss rate. And then this section up in the top right corner, global database, this gives you a high-level view of cluster-level alarms. So underneath the covers, we're evaluating a whole laundry list of alarms and best practice rules for performance of your RAC. And these are all going to be represented by in this particular area with color-coded controls that turn red when you have a problem and green when there is no problem. So there's a progression of colors that goes up from blue, yellow, orange, red to indicate whether there's a problem. And this is important because this is showing you that even though you might have a problem on an individual node, your cluster as a whole may be performing fine. Balance, this is just a measure of cluster efficiency because if you're imbalanced, then you're not using all of your RAC resources effectively. And availability, which is self-explanatory, how many of your nodes are actually up. And then we also show you the status of the individual instances, because even though if your cluster as a whole may be performing well, if you got an individual instance that's in trouble, you might want to look at that as well. Blocks in and out of the network interconnect and blocks in and out the physical reads and writes out of the I/O subsystem. ASM, many RAC customers are using ASM, so we're monitoring that. It's supposed to be automated, but as we found that it can get into trouble, so we're actually monitoring the activity and letting you know if there's any problem there. Total I/O activity, the average time to read the block of data from the disk, again, more I/O metrics. And then the general I/O, storage and I/O condition over the entire cluster. So if you have a large cluster, this is just to show you what it looks like if you have more than 6 nodes, we just go into panels of panes. We'll support more nodes than can fit on a screen, and you'll just see a color-coded representation of whether or not there's any problem on any of those nodes, and you can switch and bring those nodes up. Drill downs that we have, again, global equivalents of the standard Spotlight drill downs, if you're familiar with those, top sessions, locks, and activity. The only difference is that we show you the sessions for the entire cluster and not just one instance, locks for the entire instance, activity across the entire instance. So you can look at it both at a node level and at cluster level with an easy click. There are RAC-specific drill downs for all those alerts that I showed you on the home page, cluster latency, overhead, balance, and miss rates. So there's more detailed information available within Spotlight to help you diagnose a problem if we actually find something. This is just a representation of what the sessions drill down looks like. If you're familiar with Spotlight, it looks almost identical to the general Spotlight sessions drill down. The only difference is that we've added in the instance name here, so that we're consolidating all the data across the different instances. And this is another look at the session drill down to show you how we're actually showing you the specific SQL run by individual users of the cluster. Spotlight on Oracle RAC also monitors RAC services. Some people are using this. It's being used increasingly to more closely control how the different services that you want to deploy on a RAC are spread across the nodes. So we're showing you the performance across the nodes for CPU, physical reads and writes by service, and there's a drop-down box that I'll show you that later, so you can select the different services and see how that service is working by node. And then you can also select specific nodes and see what services are running on that node. So this helps you better understand how you're balancing your load, because as the increased flexibility of being able to add specific services and assign them to specific nodes also gives you the capability to throw your RAC cluster out of balance. So this gives you a way to kind of monitor how that's going. The alarms, again, against any instance within your cluster will be monitored. We'll also have cluster alarms that are consolidated across for the same sort of things that we monitor in Spotlight on Oracle. And then there's the cluster-specific alarms that say the overhead is high, miss rate is high, latency, lost corrupt blocks, archive destination. This is just a representative of a single instance alarm. Again, if you mouse over, you get some more detailed information about the specific alarm. This is just what it looks like when you have a cluster balance alarm and cluster latency alarm. And frequently cluster latency and overhead are going to be related. And let me go back. Now I'm going to switch over to show you an actual instance of Spotlight on RAC. This again is the home page, and you see the individual instances represented here. This is a 3-node cluster. The color codes tell you that there's an underlying problem on this particular instance, and so we'll show you the detail there just with a mouse over. We show you information and which alarms are on that particular instance as they come up. As you go in, I'll click up here on the top icon just to go directly to the cluster drill downs. And we have detailed information about latency, ping time, prepare time, total latency. Any of these, if they're hard to understand, all you got to do is click on the help, and we give you detailed help, context-sensitive help about that specific element. So Spotlight we've stuck to the paradigm of being very intuitive and user-friendly. So we don't expect people to have to read a lot of manuals to start using this thing. If you don't understand what you're seeing, then just click on the help and we'll tell you what it is. You can save, expand, copy any of these graphs out. Again, this is just basic Spotlight capability. I'm clicking over to the balance drill down just to give you a view of that, showing the different, comparing the performance across the different nodes that are in the cluster. And if you're interested in a particular node and you want to look at that, you can highlight it. Overhead. And this gives you a look at the weight activity on the cluster, and specifically looking at how much of the weight activity is related to cluster events, what users are waiting for that particular, are being affected by that particular bottleneck. And I'll also go over to, I told you I would go to services. Oh, this is I/O. Let me go to services. Okay, this is the services drill down. You can see that we have several services defined here, and we're monitoring all of them and what performance we have on which cluster represented in the graph here. And you can switch just by using the drop down and sort of swap the graph around and look at the nodes and see what services are on each node. And how you're doing with I/O, CPU on each one of those. And then we have more detailed information of services, of CPU utilization, again, I/O by service, activity, detailed information about weights as well. I'll go over to our and just to give you an indication of the graphical capability of Spotlight, you can expand any one of the graphs if you want to get a closer view, and of course you can zoom in on it. These are just standard Spotlight capabilities. Finally, I'll look at the sessions. Again, you see the RAC instance for each one of these. You select one, you have detailed information about that, what is going on in that instance, the weights for that particular instance, the session SQL, what the locks are for that particular instance. So there's a wealth of information available here to allow you to fully diagnose what the performance is in your RAC cluster. There's also an alert log that shows you a consolidated look at all of the alarms that have come up by time or in a simple log format. So if you want to look at your cluster over a period of time and see what was going on a particular day, you can see you've got alarms that came up at what time, and furthermore you can actually jump to that time and you can look at what Spotlight looked like at that point going into our history browser. But this is the history browser portion of Spotlight, so we're not actually looking at the RAC cluster as it's running right now. We're looking at what it was doing at the point where we got that alarm. So this is a way for you to kind of go through, and on the left side here you can see all the different times and specific events that happened over those times to help you kind of go back in time and do a replay in case you're interested in what was going on in the past. And with that, I'll switch it back to John in the name of keeping this on schedule.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Okay, so you saw from Scott's presentation piece there, the primary thing with Spotlight and RAC is it gives you a global view of what's happening in your RAC environment. You're not looking at individual pieces and trying to figure out what the reality is. You can see the reality there right on the home page, and you can drill down and figure out what is actually going on, what is the diagnosis. With a built-in help, of course, context-sensitive help. If you're a little bit unfamiliar with RAC, then you've got lots of explanations there that's going to help you resolve the bottleneck. Okay, so moving on to the next piece then, benchmark factory databases. Our benchmark factory databases, for those of you that have used Quest products for a while, will know that it's been around for a long, long time, and perhaps those even that are familiar with this piece perhaps didn't realise that it already supported RAC. So that was kind of inbuilt already, and it's natural to include that with this edition of the DBA suite. So benchmark factory databases performs a number of functions depending on what sort of use case you have. So I'm going to talk about a couple of typical use cases. One is what is the potential scalability of your Oracle RAC cluster. So this is a scenario where everything is okay right now, but what happens in 12 months' time when I've got say a 15 or a 25% increase in my user load? Will my current configuration work well enough and satisfy my performance SLAs in the future? So how can I test that and preempt any potential problems that I might get as a result of increased user load? Okay. The second scenario I want to talk about is just simply a straight benchmark. So this is where you are planning to make some changes to the server. Perhaps you want to add another node to the cluster. Perhaps you want to upgrade the version of Oracle. And of course, you don't just do this straight in the production environment, right? I mean, you do this in your test environment. So is there any way that I can benchmark my production system as it is right now in order that I can do some what-if analysis using some out-of-the-box standard benchmarks to see what would happen if I upgraded to 11G Release 2? To what effect is that going to change the performance of my RAC cluster? And the third one is the replay of production environments. This is a similar thing to the first bullet, the second bullet, but instead of using standard benchmarks, we use real application production workloads. So can I take my current application workload and somehow capture and replay it in a test environment, in a replica of my production RAC environment, and do some what-if analysis there too? And so this is the primary thing with benchmark factories. It's all about change management. It's allowing me to mitigate the risk of, if I make some sort of change, is that going to adversely affect performance of my RAC configuration in the production environment? And then, of course, you've got lots of RAC or reporting capabilities as well that's going to help you make that decision. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch across to my desktop. And hopefully you can see this screen. Depending on your screen resolution, you may have to use the scroll bar, but hopefully you can see this. One of the first things I want to show you with code, so far as managing a RAC environment is concerned, is a number of screens in code that currently support RAC. And this is one of the key ones for you as DBA, is how do I get a top-down view of my entire RAC environment? And this is where the database browser comes in. The database browser, you can see on the left, is showing me my servers and my databases. I don't actually have the luxury of having a RAC environment on my laptop right now, but you can appreciate that if I had a number of different instances as part of a cluster, a number of servers as part of that cluster, I could see all my servers and see all my databases, and then click in and get detailed information about any one in particular. I can also access database objects and schema objects immediately from this view in the same way that I would conventionally use a schema browser. So I just click on an object type, and on the right-hand side I get information about that, about those objects. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, coming back to here, is I talked about workload replay, and the workload replay is a capability that you may be familiar with from the Oracle side, which allows you to do capture and replay into a test environment. by capturing what's happening in production. And we've actually had this technology in Quest for several years, but this isn't actually anything new for us. And equally, this works well in a RAC environment. So we use Oracle trace file capture, and you can actually initiate an Oracle trace file capture in a number of ways. You can use the session browser in Toad, which is right here. So the session browser lets you look at all the database sessions that are running in your RAC environment. You can select user session. You can start a trace on that user session. You can define what information is recorded in that trace file, such as weight information and bind variables and so forth. Run that trace file for a finite period of time and then stop the trace file, and that trace file then gets saved. The next thing you want to do is to actually get visibility of that trace file and see what's in it. So through our database diagnose menu, you have a relatively new feature called trace file browser, which gives you a much more graphical representation of what's in that Oracle trace file, as opposed to using the traditional TK-prof type of interface, which requires a little more interpretation. So this is a trace file browser. You can see I've got a number of recorded transactions. I can mouse over each one. I can see what they were. I can see what weight summaries there were, and I can look at explain plans and lots of other information that's available to me in there. If I then decide, well, that's representation of what I want to replay into my test environment, having replicated my production RAC environment into my test environment, is I can launch the benchmark factory piece from here and actually send this trace file content over to benchmark factory for replay. Then if I move over to benchmark factory, you can see here I've got a demo job set up here, which contains, you can see it's for Oracle Workload Replay. I've got a single session recording in here, which has been captured in Toad. I could have a multitude of different what are called user scenarios in here, and each of these user scenarios is actually captured all the transactions from the trace file. And you can see here it's captured the latencies from each individual transaction. You can see here the statements, etc. So I can bring in a number of those, and I can immediately replay them. And what I get on my test environment is a faithful reproduction of what actually happened on my production RAC cluster running in a test environment. Now the thing with Benchmark Factory is that what's really cool is that this is fine, but what if I want to predict what would happen if I, in 12 months' time, say, where my user load increases by 25%, am I able to somehow simulate that activity? And that's actually a very simple thing to do. So maybe by right-clicking the trace file replay job, I can actually copy this to a number of different alternative scenarios. I can copy to a straight scalability test, which allows me to set a user load that I might predict I might have in 12 months' time, say 25% higher user load, or I can copy to a goal-based test, which is a similar kind of thing, but this time I can set a threshold of what transaction throughput I'm looking to achieve in 12 months' time with a set user load. Is my current RAC configuration going to provide me with the capabilities to support that increased user load? So what I've done here is I've copied this actually to a scalability test, which copies all of the same transactions I recorded using the trace file, but now I have the capability of changing the user load that I'm going to be running in my test environment. So it's exactly the same transactions, but now I'm artificially loading up the activity on my test environment with additional user loads to predict what's likely to happen. Now I can use this in isolation, of course, but what makes perfect sense, as you've seen by Scott's presentation, is I can combine this with an excellent view of what's happening in my test environment by using Spotlight on RAC. So I can replay this activity in my test environment, and then I can run Spotlight on RAC on my test environment and use that to see whether in fact I'm going to have any bottlenecks or contentions or out of balance conditions in my RAC environment with this increased user load. So I really am using this as a crystal ball. I'm actually using this DBA Suite RAC edition to do a what-if analysis of increased user load in the future, and using Spotlight to predict what might be the downside of doing that, and maybe need to make some adjustments to my RAC configuration. The other scenario I mentioned before in Benchmark Factory is the ability to do a straightforward benchmark So what I have here is another demo, and Benchmark Factory comes with a number of predefined standard benchmarks out of the box. So this is one of the other things you get with Benchmark Factory, is you don't have to figure out how to create these types of tests like TPCH and TPCC, which are fairly well-known benchmark tests. They actually come already included. So Benchmark Factory creates all the objects. It allows you to set a scalability for that, so you can define what size you want, how much data you want in the target tables, and then it gives you a number of different transaction mixes that you then run against your test environment, which again is obviously a replica of your production RAC configuration, to actually do that benchmark. Having done a benchmark, then you store the data in Benchmark Factory's repository. You then make the changes in your test environment that you're planning to make in production by adding additional nodes or upgrading the database version or whatever it is, and then you replay the exact same test against your modified RAC environment, and then you do a comparison of performance between the two. There's a number of different potential use cases that you might want to consider, and Benchmark Factory helps to achieve all those. And then the key thing, of course, is at the end you get the graphical charts and things that give you the evidence that you need to make informed decisions about what configuration is the optimum one for your environment. Okay, so let me switch back to PowerPoint and just show you an example of what kind of reporting capabilities you get from Benchmark Factory. And here is, because the key question, of course, is what actually is the optimum configuration to use. As I said before, many customers we speak to generally just use a two-node cluster because that's the safest one to use. What this test has shown you is a test using a standard benchmark that is comparing the relative performance of a single, a two, or a three-node cluster to see which is the optimum one to use in production. And you can see here a number of different graphs. This top one, for example, is showing you transaction throughput versus user load. Because what you're looking for as a DBA is, not necessarily will it perform capably right now, but will it perform well in the future. So I can extend my user load capability in Benchmark Factory and actually assess the relative performance of different configurations of RAC to see which is the optimum one to use in production. Of course, I mentioned at the beginning that TOFA Oracle also supports RAC, and this is not new either. This has been around for several years. It's just something you may not be aware of, because it's not immediately obvious. But of course, if you're in specific windows in code, then it is obvious. And you can see in the screenshot, for example, is the Oracle Parameters window. And in the Oracle Parameters window, we get the additional instance column, which is clearly showing you that you are connected to an Oracle RAC cluster. And you get an instance view, and it shows you Oracle parameters per instance. Of course, there are other windows too. All the window connection bars in code give you an indicator to show that you are actually connected to a RAC connection as opposed to an instance connection. And these are some other windows, as I mentioned before: database browser, session browser, database monitor, and top sessions all collect data. As soon as you're connected to a RAC cluster, it now collects data from the GB dollar table. So you are actually getting a true representation of information from that RAC cluster. So we'll make the slide deck available to you all so that you can take advantage of some of these other places where you can go and get information. I'll just provide some useful links for you, so that if you want additional information or you want to do a trial download of the DBA suite. Perhaps you're currently on code with DB admin module, or you could be on the DBA suite Oracle, and you're just interested in the RAC side of things and just want some more information. The first link is how to go and get information, product information about DBA suite RAC edition, and download the trial. So the trial download key will give you 30 days usage of the RAC edition. You can try out and see what you think. There's also a very good video on how to use Spotlight on Oracle RAC, which is built by Scott. and he'll walk you through some of the things that he talked about in his presentation. There's also, we have, you may be aware, we have a community in Toad called toadworld.com. And toadworld.com is the one place you really need to go if you need technical articles, technical information, papers, video clips, expert blogs, anything to do with Toad in particular using this new edition. We have some benchmark-specific information about testing RAC environments, which are focused on things like how to tune the interconnect. So this is a kind of a white paper that you can go have a look at. There's another white paper which is on general white paper on load testing and monitoring of Oracle RAC environment. I've also included a very useful link here, which is something we did some years ago with Dell computers, which is actually a case study where we really thoroughly tested Benchmark Factory on RAC and Spotlight on RAC, and you can see the results in this case study. So this is a real-world example of these pieces being used in a real-life environment. So we'll send you all an email tomorrow with a link to the recording and to the slide deck where you'll be able to get access to all this information. One final thing I want to talk to you about as well is I mentioned ToadWorld. Here's some more information about ToadWorld. ToadWorld is your one-stop resource. You can access ToadWorld now directly from inside of Toad through the search bar. So it becomes a context-sensitive vehicle or any resources to do with both Oracle or any of the pieces that we talked about today. And you see the screenshot here. We have a promotion right now, which you'd be excited about, which is an I Love Toad promotion. And this will give you an opportunity to win a Toad office set. So this is mouse pads, it's mugs, shirts, all sorts of wonderful Toad logo stuff that you can have an opportunity to win. So have a look at that. And as I say, there is a huge amount of information here. This is, I really recommend you take a look at this because you've got industry experts, people that you may have come across, like Guy Harrison, for example, Dirk Scalzo, Stephen Feuerstein. They have their own individual blogs and they have their own individual portals. They give you a vast amount of technology information. So this combines technology information as well as product information. You've got video clips, lots of events. So if you want a heads up on what other events are coming up around Toad, you can get all that kind of information from there. So it just remains for me to just say thank you for attending this on behalf of Scott and myself. And so without further ado, I'd like to open up this presentation for questions.
Thank you, sir. And to the phone audience, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1 on your telephone keypad at this time. A voice prompt on your phone line will indicate when your line is open to ask a question. Please state your name before doing so. And again, that'll be *1 for questions or comments at this time.
Just looking at the online questions, there's just going through the list top to bottom. There's a question here, actually a question for you, Scott, which is what is the overhead of using Spotlight and RAC on the cluster?
Okay, the short answer that I always get when I ask that question is it depends, but that's not good enough. It does depend on the load of your system. It depends on the servers that where you're actually running Oracle. So there's a lot of different things that are going to change the load of Spotlight on the system. Obviously, a heavier loaded system will in turn have more overhead from Spotlight. But given all that, in our tests, in our benchmark tests for every release, we test that we stay under 2% overhead for when we're running through our list. So we expect that on average we should be at 2% or less, or not too much over that.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So you've got another one here, which is asking about performance analysis. How does performance analysis, which also includes Spotlight, fit into the Toad suite? I've been using PA for RAC for about 2 years now, evaluating Toad. A lot of great features in Toad, but the performance and monitoring of PA is superior. Am I missing something in Toad? Yes. Toad is a kind of a desktop-based environment. It's all seat-based licensing. So everything is driven from that. It's not kind of a server type of setup. PA is more of an enterprise level configuration, which doesn't include Spotlight. As I mentioned, all of the Spotlight parts that are associated with Toad DBA Suite are seat-based licensing. So that might be an interesting configuration for you, but it's the same Spotlight. There is no difference between the Spotlight that's in PA and the Spotlight that's in Toad. Is that right, Scott?
Right. Well, there's no Spotlight in PA per se. Some people have purchased Spotlight together with PA at an enterprise level, so they can use them for as required for their specific purposes. Spotlight tends to be more geared towards real-time analysis and real-time troubleshooting, and Spotlight obviously is very simple to configure and install and get up and running. So if you have a new system, PA is a little more resource intensive. It's a 3-tier architecture. It requires a server. It requires an agent, but it also brings a lot more depth of information in particular for workload analysis. So they're complementary in many ways, but the PA is more focused on doing enterprise level analysis of the performance of your most critical systems and workload analysis of who is doing what, when, and where, and you can examine it from several different dimensions, by machine, by user, by application. If you're already a PA user, you're familiar with all of that. But that's the way they work. Typically, people will use Spotlight on machines that are, in addition to being a quick hit way to diagnose a problem, it also is easier to configure and easier to license. You can also use it on less critical systems as well.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Another question is there any documentation to project the difference between the previous Toad and Toad Oracle RAC? Yeah, if you go to toadworld.com, if you go to the Toad Oracle community, you'll find there's on the left-hand side, there's a link that takes you to the trial resources. And if you click on the trial resources, there's actually a functional comparison between the different Toad editions. And we just recently upgraded this to add on the RAC edition, so you can actually compare, Toad with DBA admin module with DBA Suite and with DBA Suite RAC edition. So you get a kind of a functional comparison between the two. That might be interesting for you. How does Toad RAC compare to Oracle Enterprise Manager? As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the idea with the RAC edition of the DBA Suite, in particular Spotlight, is it gives you a sense of what is happening across the entire cluster. You can get pieces of the same information through OEM, but you don't get a kind of global top-down sense of what's going on. OEM is one, you've really got to be quite an experienced DBA, I think, to get the best out of OEM. And I don't want to sort of say any more because it really just depends on the level of experience you have with OEM. I mean, a lot of the DBAs out there have used OEM for years and can really push the boundaries of it. But for less experienced DBAs, it can be a little bit challenging. So, we're really kind of a complementary. I mean, you can use OEM and you can use RAC edition. It's not a problem. It's just that we're giving you a different perspective on things, I guess. Scott, have you got anything else to add?
Sure. In addition to what John was saying, there's some specific things in Spotlight that are not available in OEM. And as John said, we view it sort of as a complementary tool. You can use OEM for your basic monitoring, but it sometimes is a little tougher to drill in and diagnose problems. But beyond that, also OEM, it doesn't have RAC diagnostics for anything other than 11G. They just added the ABDM capability for 11G. So if you're running 9i or 10G, OEM is not going to cover you. Where Spotlight will cover you from 9i up to 11G. Another difference is predictive diagnostics. That's something new that we just touched on today. We really didn't get onto it much, but Spotlight has the capability to predict degrading SQL, impending bottlenecks, do performance modeling to tell you in the future what sort of CPU, I/O, or you're going to need, and that can be used quite effectively in conjunction with Benchmark Factory, as John was showing, to model your feature needs and then actually test your feature needs as well. So those are some differentiators we have. We don't think it's necessarily a replacement for OEM, although we know some people who do use it instead of in place of OEM, but the majority of our customers really use both.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Does Toad Spotlight include the new Toad 10.1 DBA suite? Yes, it does. So we, as I say, upgraded Spotlight as part of the DBA suite. Both the DBA suite Oracle and the DBA suite RAC edition is the same. The Spotlight Oracle piece is the same effectively. It's just the RAC edition has the RAC capabilities. And as I say, for 10.1, this gives you the Spotlight OS, so Linux Unix and Windows, as well as Scott mentioned, the predictive diagnostics. So if you're on 10.0 and you want to have these additional capabilities, then you can just upgrade to 10.1 and you'll just get them. Okay, so that's a question from Linda. Question from Krishna. Well, I think this is probably one for you, Scott. We're using Foglight. Does it have all the features as a Spotlight?
Does it? Say that again?
We're using Foglight, and does it have all the features that Spotlight does?
Ooh, yeah, that's my product too. I've got both of those. Foglight has features that Spotlight does not have. Obviously, it has reporting, it has service level management. It's made for continuous unattended monitoring, whereas Spotlight is a real-time monitor. Spotlight is a desktop product. Again, Foglight, like performance analysis, is a 3-tier architecture. It's a little bit more involved to deploy and manage. We are building Spotlight. We're building in the lessons we've learned from Spotlight, and for example, the way we design our diagnostic screens. That's kind of being built into Foglight over time. So you'll see some if you have the latest release of the Oracle cartridge for Foglight, you'll see some common themes. It's not quite as deep as Spotlight right now in terms of its total coverage. It's because we are adding to it gradually, but I see the two tools as complementary. For a lot of what you want to do in Foglight, if it bothered you to switch context between Foglight and Spotlight, you'll be able to do more diagnostics in Foglight moving forward as we flesh out the Foglight cartridge and add those capabilities in. But there's always going to be some things that there's always going to be some tools that, like predictive diagnostics, that are just in Spotlight as well. And additionally, as I keep repeating, Spotlight is most effective when you need to take a quick look at something, because it's very easy to install and get up and running within a few minutes, when it may be a little bit more in depth to get Foglight up and running. If you already have Foglight up and running, then that's great. So I'm trying to get across I don't know how effectively, but I'm trying to get across the idea that they serve two different purposes. There's overlap, but there's a sweet spot for each, and we're trying to make our products better, like make our Foglight product better by using the lessons that we've learned from Spotlight. Yeah.
I mean, fundamentally, Foglight is an enterprise-level unattended monitoring tool, so you don't physically have to be there to see what's going on. It has unattended alerting, etc., and it's looking at the entire technology stack. Spotlight is looking at a particular database. and you can launch Spotlight from Spotlight. But Spotlight really is a real-time diagnostics tool to resolve performance bottlenecks. It's not really intended to be a monitoring tool, so it's kind of different kind of direction. Question from Rena: would this work? So would the DBA Suite RAC edition work on Oracle 10G R2 standard edition? Absolutely yes. You don't need enterprise level Oracle to use this. Would we need Oracle configuration management license? No, I mean you can use DBA Suite with standard edition. So no problem. And a question from sorry, Scott, do you want to?
I wanted to answer a question that nobody's asked yet, because I'm sure somebody might be thinking it. There's we don't depend on AWR or ASH, so you don't have to license anything from Oracle for the product to work. You don't need.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, there are capabilities in both Oracle, for example, where you can leverage ADDM and AWR, and if you're licensed, and if you have the Enterprise Edition, but there is absolutely no dependency on that. In fact, there are several other things in code you can use as alternatives to that if you're not licensed or you're on Standard Edition. So there is no dependency on this additional management packs to be able to use anything in the DBA Suite RAC Edition. I think we may have already answered this, but we'll ask the question: does Spotlight and RAC provide any information on the health of Oracle clusterware as opposed to Oracle RDBMS? What do you want for you, Scott?
Oracle clusterware? No, I don't think we do. If you're talking about something at an OS level cluster rather than the cluster of, we do monitor the underlying operating systems of the individual nodes on the cluster, but we're not looking at what kind of hardware cluster you're using, whether it's Oracle clusterware or something from HP or Dell or whatever.
Okay, well, I think that takes care of any of the online. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to kind of come through on the line?
Gentlemen, we do have telephone questions. We have two of them. Let's go to our first caller.
I'll pass my questions to answer.
Thank you. And next caller, go ahead.
Hello, it's David Chen from Computing. Just question for Benchmark Factory, does it require 11G?
Benchmark Factory works with Oracle version 7.3.4 all the way through to 11G release 2, so it's pretty much any version of Oracle that's around.
Oh, really? Because
yeah.
we play only 11G, right?
No, you can replay on 9i, 8, any of the older versions. Yeah, it's not limited to 11G. You can use it for older versions.
It's not built. Yeah, it's not built on any Oracle technologies that are based on that are just available. It's similar to Spotlight in that the Oracle has come out with like some ADDM stuff in 11G, but it's 11G only, where we have our rules and alerting for cluster for all of our supported platforms, not just the latest.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, in particular on the Oracle kind of replay technology, which they introduced in 11G, it kind of goes back to, you can do capture replay on 10, but that's it. If you're on 9, you can't use real application testing. So this is where Benchmark Factory is a viable alternative where you're still using older platforms.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
We have no further telephone questions.
Another question online was from Tony. I have the Oracle agent running on most boxes. Is this product aware of the agent software at all? Do you mean is that the Enterprise Manager agent, I guess?
I can speak to that. We actually added capability in Spotlight where we actually monitor the performance of the agent manager, if you're talking about OEM agent manager, and whether or not it's up or down. And and what you can also drill down and see the specific sessions that agent manager is running and what impact that's having as well. So so we do have some monitoring diagnostics of OEM within Spotlight.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Okay, well, if there's no further questions, again, thank you very much for listening. And both myself and Scott put our email addresses on there, so should you have any further questions, feel free to just drop us a line. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now conclude today's conference call. Thank you.